Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the OK Grognard Show. It's Sunday, May 31st, 2020, 9:30 a.m. Central, or just after, in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Down here on terra firma, I've been enjoying watching a lot of the coverage of the astronauts in their new ride head up to the International Space Station. It's been quite a treat. I've got to say I'm very much impressed with how futuristic everything looks. You know, when I was younger, when all of us were younger, and we looked at some of the things they were doing, everything for a long time looked very, I don't know, space age, futuristic. And then I think we got inundated with a lot of science fiction. It became something everybody was familiar with. We constantly talked about all these great things that we have technology-wise that came out of science fiction. You know, Morning Lost Nomad. It is a new week, so we'll be starting up a new list for the drawing. I have not yet decided what we will do for week 10. I realize that one of my two 13th Warrior DVD copies that I have is not a shrink wrap. It just feels wrong giving away. D4 Caltrops, thanks for chiming in there. LexFire22, good morning. And given it's not in shrink wrap, I don't know if I feel right giving it out as a prize. The first one will be given away because it is in shrink wrap. We'll make that announcement tomorrow, as we do on Monday, and figure out who won. I'll contact them. We'll make sure they're up for it, and then we'll make the announcement. I've got some other things. I got to dig around a little bit. I've got some of those cool Hildebrandt posters, the Coca-Cola College series. When I was picking up my set for the wall, I wound up getting a couple of extras because I would get them sometimes in groupings. So I would find that I was able to get three, and I needed this one out of the three, and I needed this other one out of these other three. And the pricing was such that, just waiting around and getting a single one wasn't going to save me any money, realistically. So I wound up with several copies of Hildebrandt posters that are duplicates. Anyway, I've got some extra tubes laying around, so I think we will start, and I'll announce it tomorrow for sure. There's some other things I've got around here that are really nice, and yet I think the big thing is going to be that very exciting Harryhausen Day special. June 29th, Ray Harryhausen would have had his 100th birthday. He passed away when he was 92 years old. But that means that Monday, the 29th of June, is Harryhausen Day. If you're unfamiliar with his stop-motion animation, you might have seen old movies like Clash of the Titans, Golden Voyage of Sinbad, the seventh voyage of Sinbad. Jason and the Argonauts with all those cool monsters. And if you're familiar with those, then you know that big, hairy-legged, hooved, horned creature there was a miniature put out by Emperor's Choice about 20 years ago. And I've got an extra one of those in shrink wrap in a box and a couple others. So one of the things that I'm going to do is on the 29th, that will be the prize, which means if you want to be in for that, you'll need to make sure you chime in during the week of June 21st through 27th, inclusive. So keep that in mind. But tomorrow I'll do a drawing for a 13th Warrior DVD, and I'll announce what will be this week's prize. It'll be something cool. Prize. It's giveaway. Giveaway prize. It's fun. I like doing it. I got extra stuff. Don't forget the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. So true. And one of my favorites, Mysterious Island. The premise for it, of course, pretty goofy, but the creatures that are on it that fight with the giant crab is so cool. The bees, they're just all sorts of really cool stuff in that one too. So lots of fun there. And well, there are just so many from Money Joe Young and onward, right? It's just so much cool. And let's see now, just cleaning up the list here. Got you 3 on the drawing for week 10. Real good. Anyway, we should probably get started. I'm kind of dragging my feet here, and we've been recording for almost 7.5 minutes. And yet, what we need to have a look at this week, the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Initiative and Combat Table, compiled by David M. Prata. Version 2.2 from 2006. We are on page 9 in this part 4. We've been moving along. I want to go back because at least I did, had a problem with something that was supposed to be on Dungeon Master's Guide, page 65, and so it is true. Look at the very top here. This rule about casting spells, right? This is on the section of spell casting in combat, and the way that 6 is getting people nauseous, flipping through like that so fast. Number 6 reads, the spellcaster cannot use his or her dexterity bonus to avoid being hit during spellcasting. Okay. Semicolon. Doing so interrupts the spell. So this is obviously weirdly worded, because if it says you can't do something, then there is no result. Doing so interrupts the spell implies that you can do it, but that's what's going to happen if you do. But it clearly states the spellcaster cannot. So something's off about the wording of this. So I jumped into the DMG in between and was looking up some stuff on page 65, switching to my tiny reading glasses. That is to say, for reading tiny stuff. Page 65, left-hand column, spellcasting during melee is the first big header. It starts up a section in which the second paragraph states, Spellcasters will always insist that they are able to use their powers during combat melee. Well, there's there's Gary writing an odd sentence because, number one, it assumes something about players. It also subsumes that the players are inhabiting their characters. It's not the characters that will insist they're able to use their powers during combat melee. It's the players of the spellcasters. Anyway, the DM must adjudicate, and this is where we're going back and forth, right? Spellcasters and the DM, part of the same paragraph. Well, you're talking in-game and then out-of-game, right? Meta. The DM must adjudicate the success of such use. Consider this. The somatic movement portions of a spell must be begun and completed without interruption in a clean, smooth motion. The spell, as a whole, must be continuous and uninterrupted from beginning to end. Once interrupted for any reason whatsoever, the spell is spoiled and lost, parentheses, just as if used, close parentheses, period. Spells cannot be cast while violently moving, such as running, dodging a blow, or even walking normally. They are interrupted by a successful hit, be it blow, missile, or appropriate spell, parentheses, not saved against or savable against, close parentheses, period. I'm going to read a little bit more. There's a new paragraph. In fact, I'm going to read a couple of bits more, because this is all part and parcel of what informs this sentence in Prata's page here. Thus, casting a spell requires that a figure be relatively motionless, and concentrating on the effort during the entire course of uninterrupted casting. For example, a magic user casting a fireball must be in sight of the intended area of effect during the course of the spell. And this is important. Line of sight. Keep that in mind, because it crosses over into a lot of things that I think people forget when they're playing games and doing a top-down view. Say, for instance, working with a battle match, you got your miniatures out there, you're taking a spell template, as some people like to use, or they're just, targeting, give me a point on the map, and then I will do the radius around it, whatever, and show you what gets affected. So do not forget line of sight, very important. And so, for example, a magic user casting a fireball must be in sight of the intended area of effect during the course of the spell, although an associate could be there to open a door intervening between the caster and the target area at an appropriate time, provided the timing was correct, of course. So this is to say, if Bigby wants to cast a spell and Melf is standing there, and Melf can time opening a door one segment or two segments before the completion of Fireball, line of sight in the intended area of effect during the course of the spell. See, doesn't say the entire casting of the spell. And that's an interesting thing, because that is something I hadn't considered myself before, that from beginning to end, you don't have to be able to see your area of effect or your target. You just have to, at some point during the course of the spell, be able to pick your target, which is suggesting that at any point That also implies you could close the door, as long as during the course of the spell you could see it. Doesn't say during the course of the spell and at the end. Interesting. I should read on. There's probably more, and it gets explained, and I'm just forgetting because it's been a while since I've looked at this much of this section. The caster cannot begin a spell. Interrupt it just prior to completion, run to a different area, then complete the spell. Interruption instantly cancels it. Unless a spell has no somatic components, the caster cannot be crouching, let alone prone during casting. Standing, seated, apparently. Alright, I don't know. A lot of people probably don't remember the movie, was it The Raven? With Vincent Price and Boris Karloff as wizards, as well as what's his name from the Maltese Falcon? Do you remember? 1963. Peter Lorre, The Raven. Vincent Price, Peter Lorre, Boris Karloff. That's one to remember. Let's just pop it up over here. It's a Roger Corman movie. Richard Matheson, screenplay. Edgar Allan Poe, based on Edgar Allan Poe. Very loosely based on the Edgar Allan Poe. Matheson. Got to remember Omega Man, I Am Legend. That's his original material. So he wasn't just screenwriting or creating a teleplay on that one. He's done his share, though. 1974, the year D&D was published first. He did a TV Dracula movie. Did his share of Night Strangler, Night Stalkers, Night Gallery, Twilight Zones, all those old, who was in this particular Dracula? I know we're getting off on a challenge. Oh yeah, Jack Palance was Dracula. That crazy old bird who did the one-handed push-ups. Starred in City Slickers as the old crusty cowboy. Classic. Sarah Douglas was one of Dracula's wife. That's what they call the three. In 1974, they weren't just female vampires. He had 3 wives. So, sensibilities were a little different. If Corman puts them that way in the script, then he has less trouble with the censors when they're running around biting everybody, I guess. Anyway, Raven. A magician who has been turned into a raven turns to a former sorcerer for help. There are some great scenes in this, to say the least. Peter Lorre, Boris Karloff, Vincent Price, Olive Sturgis is in there. This, by the way, one of the earliest appearances of Jack Nicholson as a young man, 1963. So do yourself a favor. The spells they're casting in this movie, effects are 1963 effects, but it's well worth checking out if you can get a hold of a copy or pick it up somewhere. And I know we're jumping around all over the place from Harryhausen to D&D and then back to another movie, but the spellcasting in that is the point. It can thus be understood that spellcasting during a melee can be a tricky business. for a mere shove at any time can spoil the Dwemer. Any spell can be attempted, but success is likely to be uncertain. Use the following procedure for spells cast during melee. There are 5 steps to this, and a little closing note before we get into magical device attacks. So I'm going to read the rest of this section from the DMG. So it all informs this section of David Prata's treatise, if you will. Number 1. Spellcasters must note what spell they intend to cast at the beginning of each round prior to any knowledge of which side has initiative. I'm going to say, by the way, that I don't always require this, especially not in one-shot games, where I want things to be more fluid. D4 Caltrap says, every time I watch this stream, my watch list gets longer. Yeah, I hear ya. I barely a day goes by when I don't see something that I hadn't heard of before that's a genre movie, whether it's a fantasy or a sci-fi or even some sort of a historical sword and sandals kind of thing that I want to check out at least once. And, you know, there are plenty of shows, too, for that matter, not just movies. And they all get added in. So, prior to any knowledge of which side has initiative, right? This is part of that state your intention stuff that we talked about. I've said before that when I'm moving games along rather quickly, I will, even in regular campaigns, not just in one-shots, I will generally only require intentions be that someone tell me they're casting. If they're going to be casting a spell, I want to know that they plan to be casting a spell. But my leniency, and it's not a house rule so much as an ignoring of rules, I don't usually, unless it's crucial, ask all the rest of the players, those non-casters, what their intentions are. I let them be reactive in a lot of ways. I don't force them to make a move that they've stated they were going to make ahead of time when subsequent things that are happening around them happen before they actually take that action. So it gives them a chance to be reactive, and it makes combat a lot more dynamic, obviously. It also makes gameplay feel a lot more fair to the players, and it leaves me room to be reactive with NPCs too. Certainly if a monster sees his companion monster get its head chopped off, it's not, I'm gonna roll for morale. I'm gonna see if that drives that thing away. It's not gonna keep attacking if its morale breaks just because I said before we rolled for initiative it was planning to move up and attack. Wouldn't make sense. It has to be able to react to the ongoing conditions on the ground. Let me continue with number 2. Attacks directed at spellcasters will come on that segment of the round shown on the opponent's or on their own side's initiative die, whichever is applicable. Parentheses. If the spellcaster's side won the initiative with a roll of 5, the attack must come then, not on the opponent's losing roll of 4 or less. Thus, all such attacks will occur on the first to 6th segments of the round. That is important information. since a round can go longer with longer spells being cast, since initiative can affect ties. Number 3, intelligent monsters able to recognize the danger of spells will direct attacks against spellcasters if not engaged by other opponents so as to be prevented from doing so if they're engaged by other opponents. So they're not going to stand in melee and take an axe to the head to toss a dagger across a room at a spellcaster. Although there are times when that might be the smart move. If I know somebody's gearing up to cast a meteor swarm and I'm fighting a kobold, I may take the hit so that I can loose a couple of arrows at the spellcaster, keep him down. Even so, let's say I'm a wizard and I'm in combat with a goblin and I'm about to take a d6 of damage if I get hit, and probably will because I've got no armor class to speak of. Well, if taking that 1 to 6 damage allows me to pop off a magic missile which automatically hits, boom, foil the meteor swarm, save the party and the cheerleader and the world. So, very good plan there. And even if you've only got a few hit points left, that might be the heroic thing to do, right? Number 4, the spellcaster cannot use, and here we go, and he's quoting this directly in number 6. The spellcaster cannot use his or her dexterity bonus to avoid being hit during spellcasting. Doing so interrupts the spell. So there you have it. It's an exact quote, and it's poorly written. I'm going to read the rest of this and we'll come back. Number 5, any successful attack or non-saved against attack upon the spellcaster interrupts the spell. And then he closes this section by saying, because spellcasting will be so difficult, most magic users and clerics will opt to use magical devices whenever possible in melee, if they are wise. So, when they talk about magical devices, they are not talking about scrolls, which is essentially casting spells. They're talking about rods, staves, wands, miscellaneous magic items like figurines of power, things like that. Necklaces of fireball, right? Those are kind of examples of magical devices that you can use that can't get interrupted by a simple shove. Anyway, spellcaster cannot use his or her dexterity to avoid being hit during spellcasting. Doing so interrupts the spell. I think it would be better phrased to say the spellcaster cannot use his or her dexterity to avoid being hit during combat. Rather to say, see, now are we? I was going to say something here. Now I'm thinking some more. I was going to say if the spellcaster uses his or her dexterity to avoid being hit during a spell, doing so interrupts the spell, giving the spellcaster the choice of allowing his own spell to be interrupted in an attempt to not be hit. The equivalent of getting halfway through your spell, seeing a sword coming at you and flinching, or raising your arm to try to avoid the hit, right? And it makes sense if you are aware, if your eyes are open, if you have peripheral vision, and it is within your field of vision to see the attack coming. Why wouldn't you maybe break your own spell? So earlier, before the show, the way I was looking at that, Dex resets the spell casting process. Yeah, that's kind of, I don't know about that one. Where are we at? Almost 31 minutes? Okay. We're kind of stuck on a second here. We didn't get any further than we were last week. Dex resets the spellcasting process. So that allows you to interrupt your own spell and then start it up again. Is that what you're saying? Because I don't like that, personally. If a spell's interrupted, I do agree that it is foiled and spoiled. Spellcaster cannot use his or her dexterity bonus to avoid being hit. I believe this should read, to avoid being hit during melee combat while spellcasting. So let me read that again, or state it again. The spellcaster cannot use his or her dexterity bonus to avoid being hit during melee combat while spellcasting. Doing so interrupts the spell. I think that states it the way it's intended to be stated, while only adding in a few words that I believe were implied. A spellcaster cannot use his or her dexterity bonus to avoid being hit during melee combat while spellcasting. So it caveats that. Um, I wonder if that should say during melee, ranged, or melee. You know, I guess if everything's spellcasting, yeah, maybe during spellcasting too. Maybe that's why it's left out. I'm not convinced. I'm still up in the air on this one, everyone. I'm still up in the air. Doing so interrupts the spell. I personally think, though, that you should be able to interrupt your own spell to bring your dex to bear against an attack, to try to mitigate the attack, and understanding that you're interrupting your own spell by doing so. So I don't completely agree with the idea that you simply cannot do it. And I don't agree that this phrase was written in a way to be clear because, again, it says you can't do something and it tells you what happens if you do. If you can't do it, you can't do it. So that's kind of the sticking point. Cannot use his or her. It should be more of an if-then rather than a can't be done. Here's what happens if you do the thing you can't do. May not use. Maybe it's just a may not rather than a cannot. All right. Well, there you go. So, between a lot of miscellaneous discussion of Harryhausen and 1963 spellcasting movies, and being entrenched in further trying to discover the best way to phrase this direct quote from the DMG. I mean, I read this whole spellcasting during melee section, and that might be the only line taken verbatim. Start to finish, capital to period, semicolon included, and also, because it's a bullet point toward the end of that section, it stands alone. It's not part of a larger paragraph which gives immediate context to this sentence. This sentence is on its own as number 3, not number 6, in the DMG on page 65 in the left-hand column, just an inch and a half from the bottom of the page. All right. Well, part 4 of this examination, I think, was necessary. I'm not sure we completely resolved it. I think we've definitely put it into the realm of there's no absolute way of interpreting this. I think we know the intention. I think we know that intention is left open to interpretation because of the semantics used in stating the intention. So, where do we go from there? Personally, I'm of a mind that you let the player have agency over the character. So if the player wishes to bring their dex to bear or interrupt their own spell in an attempt to avoid being hit, so be it. If a player wishes to have their character raise their arm to block a sword instead of finishing casting a spell, I think that's fair. So I'm going to side with this is a case where we have to, as DMs, allow players the chance to increase their survivability. Anywho, pretty cool. Sitting by the fire, telling the youngster all the goodness. Well, today, OK Grognard Show, I want to thank everybody. We were doing this rules retrospective, first AD&D Combat. Part 4. We'll get back to Part 5. And you know what? Next time, we won't spend the entire show looking at that one rule again. I think we're just going to call that one put to bed. It's up in the air. DMs can interpret it different ways. I've stated how I interpret it. I think that's where I'm at. Tomorrow, weekly news. We'll be talking more about this Harryhausen Day coming up. I'm going to try to dig up some pictures too. Cartography and world building on Tuesday. Campaign discussion, specifically Grimwald stuff. That's my own campaign setting since 1974 when I started playing D&D. Coming out of the early 70s and being a chainmail and other war games player. Thursday, crafting and painting. I stayed up last night and did 3 shows. You can see them on YouTube. They were 3 bites out of a longer stream that I did from about 8:15 onward till midnight, just painting and painting and painting those catapults. I've got one of them with 3 coats on it, which I did first to get a look at it. The other 8 have just a single coat, but it's pretty good coverage this time. They're going to need 3 coats. They may need 3 and some touch-ups like the first one. So I'm going to be at it for a while. I'll probably do some of that today. I doubt I'll stream it. It's not very exciting. But if I can get a chance to get the rest of the base coats on those before Thursday, that would be ideal. Because then I can actually do a video showing how to paint the metal features, how to lighten up the brown on the ropes to distinguish those from the wood. And then, of course, at some point, after all that's done, I got to give them all a black wash to bring out the grain of the wood and highlight everything. And then, ultimately, they're all going to need a coat of flat matte Everybody says varnish, but it's a sealer. And then Friday, virtual tabletop adventure building. Saturday, we're still up in the air. They're reviewing the one I did yesterday, which was the first episode of Conan, the Adventurer, the animated series from 92 and 93. I did it as a review, but I think a Hasbro bot just auto-flagged it, and YouTube is trying to figure out, hey, what's going on? Is this fair use? Is it a review? Is it not? It's currently in their queue, but it's a weekend. I don't know when we'll hear about it next. We'll hear about it before Saturday, I'm almost sure. And we'll see what their verdict is. They may side with Hasbro despite it being a review. That's always possible. There's no sound. Clearly, I'm critiquing both the animation and the story and the characters. I'm putting it all in a quote-unquote historical context because I discuss the time it was made. I discuss what the other talent, what the performers were doing outside of that, whether it's germane. So there's a lot of stuff going on there, but it's all review and it's all reportage. So there's no reason why that shouldn't be considered fair use. Essentially, I only use half of it because I'm only using the visuals. I'm not using any of the sound. You could not use what I put out there as a replacement for the original. So it's not like you're just watching it reverse screen or something crazy with all the original dialogue, which I always find weird when people put those up on YouTube. So we'll see what they say by next Saturday. Hopefully I can move on and do episode 2. We will see. Then we're back here for Rose Retrospective when we will move further ahead. I want to say thank you to everybody who popped into the chat today. Don't forget, if you're here, just do yourself a favor and follow the channel. And do yourself another favor and chime in during the stream. You can say hello right now if you're lurking. Just type hello, hit enter, make sure you're following the channel, and if you've done that little, you'll be automatically entered into the weekly drawing. This week, not sure what it's going to be. Might be a Hildebrandt poster. I think that's likely. Then, if you're watching this on YouTube, please do subscribe. And try to get out here over to Twitch. Follow the Twitch channel. Chime in during the chat. Get in on that drawing. It's a good thing. But if you follow us on YouTube, please do subscribe. Hit a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you feel necessary. Feedback is always good. I appreciate you being here. Appreciate you being a part of this. Last chance to chime in on the chat stream. All right, then. I'm just going to say one last thank you to everybody. And have a great rest of your Sunday. Get out, get a walk in. If you're in Lake Geneva, it's beautiful out. I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.